Around 2018 is when I got onto Stranger Things, and that really just changed my world. I said, I'll cut your trailer for you. And so he said, you have 2 days. It's a really tight schedule. You cannot miss a day.
What happens in case you don't reach the deadline?
Well, then you are not welcome back to Netflix, that's for sure.
Hi and welcome back to Script to Screen, the podcast. In this episode I will talk with Brad Tobler about his job as a visual effects artist. This is the man who brought Hawkins to life in the last 3 seasons of Stranger Things. Hi Brad, how are you doing? Can you tell me something about who you are and what you do in your daily life?
Yeah, my name is Brad Tobler, and I am a VFX editor by trade. I also do directing and other VFX-like things. Like I was a VFX supervisor on a show called 1923, which is a spin-off of the Yellowstone series. But I am predominantly in editorial as a VFX editor. And
how did you roll into the visual effects part?
I've always had a fascination with visual effects. When I was younger, I would watch movies that had visual effects in them and was always curious, how did they do it? And I never thought that working in film was in my future, to be honest. Just because I came from a family that started having kids at a young age and didn't have a whole lot of money, and so didn't have funds for me to go to an expensive film school. And so for me, for a while, it was just a fascination. But that fascination turned into an obsession, really. And I got lucky to find myself in a world where I was working in post-production, but as an assistant editor. And some of the duties of that required work with some visual effects. And so that started a niche that just kind of pulled me in one direction naturally. And I just kind of followed that for the rest of my career.
Okay, and how did you start as an assistant editor?
I started as a PA. A PA is a production assistant. Basically in post-production, a PA is to help do the odd jobs around the office. It's basically an office assistant, basically. You're making sure that the office has groceries and snacks. You do script notes every day when your reports come in. You put them in a binder and stuff like that. You go do coffee runs. Like you're doing very basic office tasks. But I was in the editing room, which is important. And I was just hungry to learn, and so I would ask assistants if I could shadow them, if I could, hop on the editing system just to push a couple buttons to see what it's like. But then I got an opportunity where the director that I was working with was unhappy with the trailer that came out for his movie. And I was, young and cocky, and I said, I'll cut your trailer for you. And I hadn't even seen a single minute of footage because I've been doing the office stuff, And so he liked my cocky attitude and wanted to see if I was for real. And so he said, you have 2 days. And so I was like, okay. And so after work at basically 8 p.m., when I was done doing my PA job, I was allowed to go onto an editing system and start going through footage, and I would be able to pull selects that I thought might be good for a trailer. And I worked until about 4 a.m, and then I would sleep in the editing room until 8 a.m. to try and get whatever sleep I could, which was not much. Then I would start again my normal PA job, and then the next night is when I did the editing. So the first night was pulling the footage and getting familiar with what I had to work with. And then the second day was editing it. And so within 2 nights, I had a trailer to show this director, and they ended up liking it. They really liked it. And so they ended up, it became a legal thing, which is because there's unions involved with this industry. There's, the Editors Guild union, the Directors Guild, and all the other unions that are involved. Part of the union rules state that no one who isn't in the union can't touch an editing system.
Yeah.
And so what they had to do in order to use my trailer was to not only put me into the union as an assistant editor, but they had to retroactively pay me to show that I was an assistant editor from day one of hire.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's how I got in.
That's awesome, but you did some editing before you did the job there, I think.
Not a lot, only stuff I did in school, and just mostly like personal projects, like editing travel videos. And I was just sort of like, fascinated with editing and the software, and so I would just edit whatever I could, even if it's, my daily life. It's common on YouTube to see people making their morning coffee. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of stuff that I would edit first. And so that was actually my first real thing that I ever edited, was that.
Awesome. And at what point is something a special effect or a visual effect from what you see on screen?
So I'm going to do this in two parts. One, special effects when you're working on set is something that happens on set, right? So we have a special effects team, and so if there's supposed to be a car explosion, if we're not going to do that on set, and it has to be done after the fact, then that's a visual effect shot. But if we're going to be doing it on the day, on set, then that's going to be a special effect. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, so that's the difference between special effects and visual effects. And I know a lot of people just throw the term around special effects, which is confusing, but no, visual effects happens after the fact, special effects happens on set. But there's usually a perfect marriage of the two. Like visual effects will kind of go in and enhance what they've done.
Can you tell me something about the projects you've worked on in the past?
Some of my past projects?
Yes.
Sure. So I started in post-production, or even earlier than that?
Yeah, post-production, visual effect editing, editorial department.
I started in post-production. My first job in editing was High School Musical 3. And then beyond that, I did some odd jobs, which there's a show called Extreme Makeover Home Edition. And I worked on that as what's called a runner, which I would run footage from set to post and then back and forth. Because back then we were using tapes. It wasn't digital like it is today.
Yes.
So they would record the tapes and put all those tapes in a Pelican case. And so I was a runner and I would run the footage to editorial and stuff like that. But after that, I ended up working on a movie called Avatar.
I became a Marine for the hardship. I told myself I can pass any test a man can pass. All I ever wanted was a single thing worth fighting for.
And don't get me wrong, I was like bottom of the barrel, but I was in. Like my foot was in the door, and I was working with the team. And that was a huge learning experience and a great movie to have on my resume. And so after that, I found that jobs came easier. And I was able to get a TV show after that called Terra Nova, which was a Steven Spielberg produced TV show. Then after that, I did a TV show called Cosmos, a remake of the Carl Sagan TV show. And then after that, I started working more in features. I did a movie called Birdman with Michael Keaton. Then another TV show after that, a couple movies. But then around 2018 is when I got onto Stranger Things, and that really just changed my world. Have you heard of the show Stranger Things?
Stranger Things.
Stranger Things. It's been one of the biggest shows on Netflix since its debut back in 2016.
And can you tell me something about how you rolled into the production of Stranger Things?
Yeah, so I did a movie that was called The Last Witch Hunter. And I got that movie because I had worked with some of the VFX people on Birdman. VFX junior producer and coordinator. They ended up going onto this movie and they said, oh, Brad might be good for this movie. And so they called me on to The Last Witch Hunter, and it was, quite a movie, quite an undertaking. But that's where I met Dean Zimmerman, who was editing the movie. And Dean is great, and I love him to death. He and I, after the movie was over, went our own ways, and I did a project after that, and he did something after that. But it was a couple years later that I got a random phone call from the producer of Stranger Things, and he said, oh, hey, we got your number from Dean Zimmerman. He's working on the show, thought you might be a good fit. And they had me come in and meet everybody, and then I want to say I started a week later.
Okay, that's awesome. And did working on such a big project change the way you work on projects like Stranger Things or other movies?
It did, because, excuse me, Stranger Things is such a massive scale. You take, we'll say The Last Witch Hunter, which is a movie about 2 hours long, we'll say, probably less than that, but let's just say 2 hours. In that 2 hour span, you have 1,200, maybe 1,400 visual effects in total. That's like one episode of Stranger Things. Because in Stranger Things Season 4, the final episode was 2 hours and 20 minutes. So it was longer than a movie.
Yeah.
And it had more visual effects than The Last Witch Hunter. And there was 8 other episodes. So I had to take my process and really expand it for episodic of massive scale. And so my organization had to be buttoned up, which is something I learned on Avatar, is media management and organization. And just a good workflow that is, like a checks and balances system that helps make sure that when there's multiple people touching the edit, that if something happens, which it does, it can be easily identified, handled appropriately, and because you're talking 9 episodes in season 4, 8 episodes in season 5 with thousands of visual effect shots. You need to make sure you are buttoned up quite tight.
Yeah. And what's the longest time you've worked on one specific visual effect?
That's hard to say, because what we do is we identify very early on a visual effects shot that we know is going to be complex. So for example, in season 4, when the rift in Hawkins starts to split and it meets at the library, that was a massive, massive shot with lots of sims and CG and you name it. And so that took about a year from start to completion.
Okay.
And that was just one shot.
You do the visual effects, but you also have CGI. Is that another type of editing? Or?
So my job with VFX is to help editorial tell the story in a show like Stranger Things that needs a lot of visual effects. And so let's say, for example, you have a shot and there's supposed to be a Demogorgon running through frame, right? Well, there's no real Demogorgon on set, and so they'll shoot a clean plate of the Demogorgon moving through frame, and then they'll shoot like a stand-in that has like a tennis ball that's like a foot above his head that shows the height reference, and have him run through frame as a reference. And then what they'll have me do is mock something up just for story, just for pacing, to make sure we get the story right. Once we get the story right, then we turn that over to a vendor that has a team of hundreds of people, because that shot that where the rifts collide probably had 120 people involved to make that. You're talking modelers, you're talking sim artists, you're talking compositors. That's not one person that can undertake a job like that. That's why it takes so long. That's why it's so expensive. And so it really does take a team of people to make a shot like that.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, besides Stranger Things, you said you've worked on Avatar. Can you tell me more about the experience on set from Avatar?
So I wasn't on set. I was just in post-production. And that was when I was early on in my career. And I was just, begging for an opportunity. And I would, reach out to the people that I knew was working on it. Almost to the point where I think they got annoyed for me reaching out. And they said, fine, just come in and help us do basic tasks. And so I did. I came in, I started doing basic tasks, but one thing led to another, and I started doing more complex tasks. And next thing you know, I was part of the assistant editorial team. At that point in time, I wasn't a VFX editor, but I was interested in VFX editing, and they had several VFX editors on that movie. And so I would kind of talk to them about it and learn from them. And then after that, that was my last job as an assistant editor. I moved on to be VFX editor from everything after that.
And did you do main editing as well, or only the assistant editing? And
just for that one, it was just assistant editing, yeah.
Okay. And how do you manage creative quality under extreme high time pressure?
I mean, when you have a show like Stranger Things, you really want to pull from the best of the best. So, and that means, a producer that has a schedule and keeps you to schedule, has an editor or editing team that will help keep to that schedule, and the VFX department that also understands the importance of, we need these shots, we need them on time. If there's going to be shots that take longer, we need to put them in the pipeline sooner than later. So on season 5, I'm sure you've seen season 5 by now. So the last episode has a lot of visual effects, especially with the Mind Flayer sequence, which was huge. And so that was something that, even though it's the last episode, we couldn't wait till the end to start it. So we actually started editing out of order, starting with episode 8, and then going back and tackling a couple other main sequences, like the end of episode 4, which is the battle at Max Z. And then after we felt good about, okay, I think we have a lot of these heavy VFX sequences in the pipeline, then they would go back and edit chronologically. And it's the mindset like that that helps you keep to a tight schedule. I know for many people out there, it feels like it just takes so much time between seasons. And it does, but for 2 reasons. One, this is a massive, massive show. They filmed on set for over 300 days. Then we have to edit all that footage. But the last 2 seasons, we've also been dealt with some delays. Season 4 had a delay because of COVID. Season 5 had a delay because of the union strikes between the actors and the writers. So that delayed production. But in reality, when you're in it and you're working, it's a really tight schedule. You feel like you have no time to, you cannot miss a day. Like, you are on it 120% every day, and you barely make your mark.
Okay. What happens in case you don't reach the deadline?
Well, then you are not welcome back to Netflix, that's for sure. No, Netflix doesn't hire people that don't reach their deadline. You have to reach their deadline.
Yeah, okay. And how much of your own creativity can you implement in visual effects?
I mean, you start with what they design, right? Because they're the writers, like the Duffer Brothers wrote it with something in mind, and so you have to start with that in mind. But oftentimes, and going from script to filming on set to editing, something might not work as they had envisioned it when they were writing it on paper. You know what I mean? And so then we have to work some things out. And that's where it gets really fun, as I get to go in the room with the Duffer Brothers and Dean, and we get to problem solve. Okay, we have a problem, how can we fix this? We need an establishing, we need another beat here. And then that's where I get to kind of bring my own creativity, my own flair to it, and say, what if we do this? Why don't you try it? So I'll go and mock something up for them. bring it back. Maybe they'll give me a note or two, make some adjustments, and then that's the creative collaboration that allows for me to bring my creative flair.
And what is the most difficult visual effect until now?
I mean, it depends. They will throw everything at you. When you're the VFX editor, you have to kind of be a generalist, and so you have to kind of be able to do everything, which is a hard thing to do because at a visual effects vendor, you have a person that specializes in tracking and only tracking, or match moving, someone who specializes in 3D lighting, in textures, in modeling, in animation. All of these have people who are specialists and experts at what they do. So when they come to me and say, hey, I need you to do this shot, we need it by the end of the day, and it has all these kinds of things, you have to think outside the box on how can I do 47 people's jobs in 6 hours. And so I would say, sometimes you have to approach it with a simple mindset. I mean, again, let's say, for example, we have that Demogorgon walking across the frame. You can start with something as simple as just a dot that represents something moving through frame. But when you send that edit to Netflix for approval, the studio executives are going to be like, what's this dot? And so you can start with that just to get a sense of timing. Ultimately, something has to go in there. And that's where I come in and block it out for the edit. And then we send it to the vendors to finesse it and make it look, phenomenal like they do.
When you get a shot, for example, and you need to have a Demogorgon walking through the frame, you have one shot on set with the ping pong ball.
Yeah.
You said. But do you still need to animate the Demogorgon itself, or you get the Demogorgon animated and the shot from set, and you need to combine it naturally?
Yeah. So I have done a lot of animating Demogorgons. I'll use motion capture, which is much easier to retarget. If something, there's a library of motion capture for basic moves, jumping, sitting, standing, turning, walking, that you can just download and apply to your character, so you can have that happen pretty easily. If there's something specific that you can't find in the library of endless motion capture data, then you have to capture it yourself. But more often than not, you can get away with some of the library motion capture data that's out there. But then, yes, I would apply a walking, walk cycle to the Demogorgon, so it will be animating through the frame, or doing a big roar or something, and it just helps speed things along.
Yeah, and you got on Stranger Things via Dean Zimmerman. You've worked with him in the past. Can you tell me something about where the collaboration with Dean started?
Started on The Last Witch Hunter. That's where I met him for the first time, and he was working with, the director was Breck Eisner. Breck Eisner is Michael Eisner's son, and Michael Eisner was the CEO of Disney.
Okay.
So, big name to have in the room, and a lot of stress, and he was the nicest guy, actually. He was really nice to work with, but, high stress, high pressure, and so he would ask for things to help flush out the movie, and Dean would call me into the room and say, he's asking for this thing, do you think you can mock something up? And I would go in the room and mock it up, and then pass it back to him, and that's really where this collaboration started, which is, he needs me to mock something up so that he can show the director, and the idea is to make the director happy, to make a movie that everyone likes, and so if he and I can team up and problem solve and work out sequences and flush it out to help tell his story, then we've done our job. And I feel like over the last 7 years, 8 years actually, we've really perfected that.
And on some projects in the past, you've worked with director and producer Sean Levy. Can you tell me something about the collaboration with him?
Yeah, so my collaboration with Sean started on Stranger Things. That's where I met him.
Okay.
After season 3 of Stranger Things, he did a movie called Free Guy. So I went right on from season 3 over to Free Guy. And that's where my collaboration with him really started, because I was able to be in the room with him a lot more. You know, on Stranger Things, it's mostly the Duffer Brothers. I know he directs 2 episodes. Yeah. He comes in and does a director's cut. But my exposure to him on season 3 was very small comparatively. But on Free Guy, because he was the director, it was his movie, I was in the room with him and Dean and Ryan Reynolds, who was playing the lead actor in Free Guy, helped shape the movie. There's a lot of graphics in there and lots of really cool video game type stuff that they had me mock up for the edit. And so, yeah, that was a phenomenal collaboration. And then after that, I helped him do previs editing on a movie called The Atom Project, another Ryan Reynolds movie. And I only helped with previs editing. Once they went to production, I sent my assistant to go to that movie while I was on starting season 4, because I was on season 4 for 2.5 years.
Sounds very nice. You recently launched your own community called The Backlot.
Yeah.
Can you tell me something about that?
Yeah, so I've had a lot of interest in people wondering what I do and what it's like to work on Stranger Things. And so a lot of people found me on YouTube when I posted a little breakdown of the editing timeline of season 4, where I also talk about some of the organizational structure behind it, because it's a massive timeline, very complex. And so I just kind of talked about how to make sense of something that's so, for all intents and purposes, chaotic and messy, And, I've got a lot of people reaching out to me, expressing interest to learn more. And, I was reminded of myself when I was a teenager, and I was just hungry for knowledge, but nothing was accessible. We didn't even have YouTube back then. I know, I'm that old.
Yeah.
I had no resources to go. Maybe I could buy a movie, but back then they were VHS, so there wasn't like a special features option on the Blu-ray. Maybe you might see something on TV. Maybe they might give you a VHS special features thing, but not very often. And so I would soak up whatever knowledge I could, but it was so inaccessible. And so that's what I wanted to start with the Backlot. It's a place to learn from me, but it's also a place to be able to reach out to me and connect with me, and also connect with other filmmakers on there as well, to not only learn, but if someone's doing editing and they have a question, they can actually reach out to me directly, and I can help them work through the problem, which is something that I don't think has ever been done before. There's always been a separation, like a giant wall between, hey, you want to learn from James Cameron, you can watch his masterclass, but it's not interactive. You can't ask him a question, and I wanted to change that. And so my tagline is credibility, which means, I work in the industry and I've been in the trenches, so I'm a credible, professional, meets accessibility, and I want to be accessible to people who want to learn, who are hungry to learn and have an interest in the industry. And it's relatively new. I launched it about 10 days ago, and it's off to a good start. We're already doing live live streams where I can bring them on and I can, instruct them through a couple different things, and they can ask me questions live, and it's already showing an immense amount of value.
And how did you start on creating your own community like the Backlot?
I mean, my wife was actually the one that really helped me out with that. She knew exactly where to go and what service to use, and I'm not a web designer, but I built it myself with her help. And it's it's evolving and taking form. And as I learn more about this process, more features will roll out. But it was her that really was like, hey, I think you should do this. And so I did some research and I decided to go that route.
Okay, that's awesome. You also have your own company called Imagine That Films. Can you tell me something about what you do with Imagine That Films? And
That's a multi-level answer. So I'll give you the first answer, which is, in this industry, you are technically a freelancer, right? Even though I'm doing Stranger Things, right. I'm not a Netflix employee. I'm hired by the show as a freelancer. So financially, it made the most sense for Netflix to hire my company to do the job than me as an individual. Since I started my company, I've been able to do a lot more with it, produce commercials, produce music videos, and it allows me to get away from the computer, away from the editing system. And I love getting out and working with people, and I love being on set. And so that has enabled me an opportunity to feed that as well. That desire, which is to be on set and working with people and be creative and problem solving in that fashion.
And what type of commercial work did you do before working on projects like Stranger Things?
Just smaller projects. I did a commercial for a company called Diamond Box, where they were coming out with their boombox. A couple other small headphones and smaller commercials like that. Then I did some music videos for a band in Nova Scotia, and they reached out to me because they were unable to tour or do a lot of live performances because of COVID, and so they really wanted to try and get their music out there through the form of music videos. And so the collaboration with them was a dream come true. Like, they were just absolutely incredible to work with and gave me so much creative freedom and flexibility. And if you haven't seen some of the music videos that we created, you should check them out because they're pretty amazing. Yeah.
And do you still do something like the music videos, or?
I mean, when I have time, I don't have a whole lot of time just because movies like Stranger Things or shows like Stranger Things keep me so busy. Right now I'm in New York. I live in California, but I'm in my apartment in New York because I'm here for work and I'll be here until the summer. And so, I don't have access to my production van. I don't have access to my studio. And so I'm kind of a scaled down version of what I can do while I'm here. And so, like I said, if I have the opportunity to do it, I do it as much as I can. But, sometimes it's hard to because of the schedule.
And back to your company, Imagine That Films, for what type of creation can they hire you as a company? Is it visual effects? Is it editing, something on set with cameras?
I mean, it whatever they need. So Stranger Things hired me as a senior VFX editor, but then Paramount hired me as a VFX supervisor. And so it depends on what the role calls for. But because I'm incorporated, they hire my company, and essentially my company hires me. And we just determine what role I'm going to do for that particular project.
And what's the difference between a visual effects editor and a visual effects supervisor?
Quite a bit, actually. So there's a visual effects supervisor is in charge of making sure that it's shot correctly. There's a lot of things that are needed to make sure happens on set during filming to make sure that we have everything we need to put it together in post, right? So let's say you want to build a house. Well, there's all kinds of things you need to build a house, right? You need a blueprint, and you need to know what tools you need. You need your lumber and stuff like that. But if you go to Home Depot and don't pick up half the things you need, then you're not going to be able to put together anything. And so a VFX supervisor, make sure that it's shot properly, but then after that, they have to carry that through to the end to make sure that the shots are, going to the vendors, and that if they're coming back, they would review shots from vendors, give notes on shots to make sure that they look right, help finesse them until they're perfect, and then they will present them to like the Duffer Brothers to say, hey, here's my, we've worked with the vendor, and we've worked with, a number of different. Starts with me, then it goes to, okay, the edit's good, let's give it to the vendor. The vendor works on it, they give it to the VFX supervisor, they give their notes, and then we pitch what would be like the final version to the Duffer Brothers.
Are there also productions where you do both? So in visual effects?
Yeah, absolutely. On
supervising
1923, I was a VFX supervisor for the filming of the first 4 episodes of 8. And then after those were filmed, because we had such a tight schedule, I moved to post to help see those through. And even though my title was still VFX supervisor, because I'm also in the Editors Guild Union, I was able to do VFX editorial tasks. And so even though I wasn't like hired to be a VFX editor, I was, helping in that regard, and looking at my own shots in the edit. I had access to the live edit and stuff like that. But that's a rarity. It's very rare to see a VFX supervisor and an editor on this, be that job on the same show.
And do you have a preference of both? What you like the most to do on a production?
I don't really have a preference. I enjoy them both. I will say that, being a VFX editor and in the editing room for 2.5 years on Stranger Things, you're ready for something different. And so going out and being a VFX supervisor where you're on set and you're working with people is like a nice change of pace. So I did that after season 4. I went and did 1923, but every single day we were filming outside in Montana in weather, and we had to deal with rain, and we had to deal with hail, and we had to deal with mud, and so by the end of that shoot, I was like, okay, I just want to be in a nice, comfy, temperature-controlled office, right? Don't have to be with, so it depends, I get sick of one, I want to go do another. Until I get sick of that, I'll come back and do this.
And are there times when you work on different projects at the same time? So, for example, Stranger Things and Avatar, it didn't took place at the same time, but
usually no. Usually there's no time to do that. If that ever happens, it happens because you're just about to roll off of one project, and you're doing basic things like just archiving the project, maybe sending a few final shots. So you're still, needing to help them out, but the demand isn't very high, and so you can overlap while you're starting your next job. But there's no way you can fully do 2 projects at the same time. The demand is just way too high.
So, and on productions like Stranger Things or Avatar, are you the only visual effects artist, or do you have colleagues who help you out when you are stuck?
Yeah, so with regards to VFX editing, like on season 5 of Stranger Things, I was the senior VFX editor, and then there were 3 or 4 VFX editors that were my assistants that worked with me. There's a lot of things that need to be done. There's VFX and temp VFX, we call it post-viz, that needs to happen. And usually that's me that does that. But then once we've gotten a sequence working, and we'll call it locked, we'll use that example of the Demogorgon walking through frame. Once we've locked that scene, once we've locked that timing, then I will give it to one of my assistants and say, this is ready to go. So you need to do what needs to be done to send it to the vendor. You need to send them a reference of what we've done editorial, but you need to send them all the different material that the VFX supervisor got on set, which is clean plates, balls and charts, reference passes, textures, HDRIs. I mean, the list goes on. And so he'll start to package that up and send that to the vendor for them to take what we've done and now make it photoreal and perfect for air.
So you make a package and someone else finishes the package
That's
and
correct.
send it over to... Okay. And you talked about a vendor. What exactly is a vendor on a production?
That's a company that has a team of people and artists that will help take complex visual effects shots to final for the show. So, for example, in the Battle of Max Z, at the end of episode 4, we would have a company doing Vecna and making sure that he's photoreal, because that's highly complex, not just with animating the character, but we're also using Jamie, who's the actor, Vecna, his face performance, but onto a CG body. But then that body has to have like moving vines going on. And so that company was specializing in bringing that to life. But then there's the Mac Z, which required set extensions, which required putting the rift in the gate, which required demogorgons and so much more. And so they would do that part of things, and then we would marry them together to create the final shot.
And after working on all these projects, what are your ambitions for life, work, everything in the future?
I mean, I'd love to direct my own feature, to be honest. I would love to do that. Don't know when I'm going to have the time to do that, because right now I'm just kind of bouncing from one job to the other, which I'm grateful for. But that's a goal of mine. I would love to direct my own feature.
And do you have an idea about what the feature would go?
I mean, I have a couple scripts I've been toying around with, but it's a matter of whether or not that'll happen. But my goal is to make it happen.
Is there something you want to tell extra about the backlot or your own company?
Well, the backlot's open to everybody. If you have an interest in filmmaking, come check it out. Right now, I want to just make sure that people are excited about it and they know what it is and they come and learn about what it is. And really all you need is just an interest in film to come and enjoy yourself and be a part of it and learn.
Yeah, I think it's awesome to connect the normal world with a professional part of filmmaking and creation of such large projects.
Yeah, it's something I wish I had growing up, and so I'm honored to create it, and I hope people take advantage of it.
Yeah, it sounds really nice. And is there something specific you want to say to the viewers?
I've been doing this for 20 years, so this is just like everyday life to me, and so I'm an open book. I'm a nice guy. I'm just a regular guy that just has a job, basically. It's just, it's different than most people's jobs, that's for sure. I guess if I was going to say something to the viewers, if you have an interest in this industry and you think that there's no world for you here, I thought the exact same thing, right? I was a kid in Utah with parents that didn't have a whole lot of money, couldn't go to a fancy film school, never thought that this future was for me, and yet here I am, working on the biggest TV show in the world, and working with some incredible people like the Duffer Brothers and Sean Levy and James Cameron, and I couldn't be more grateful, but I want to stress that it is possible. It's absolutely possible. But I will say, if it is something that you want, you got to do the work. You got to put the work in. It's not going to come easy. You got to really want it. But if you do, it'll happen.
You said you wasn't able to go to a film school, but what was the education you did then?
Well, I started because I didn't know, or didn't think rather, that film was in my future. I decided to go to school initially to be an architect, and realized right off the bat that that wasn't for me. Like I realized that not that architects aren't creative, but they're also like, they have to know about, just building structure and just like so many different complicated things and math and blah, blah. I realized I really just wanted like a creative outlet. And so I ended up changing my major from architecture to graphic design. I ended up switching schools. So initially I went to the University of Utah and I went there for 2 years. I switched to an art school in Florida where I was able to study graphic design. It was there where I met some really incredible professors, one of which had an elective that was film editing. It was film editing and motion graphics, and I took that class and I really excelled and I really enjoyed it. So much so that I was a semester away from graduating and my teacher said, "You need to go to LA and pursue this." And so as opposed to graduating, after being in college for 5 years, I moved to Los Angeles. I did continue my studies at a film type school here. It was like the School of Design, where I was able to study motion graphics and visual effects and film and stuff like that. But that's where I really tried to break in and get into the industry. And then, but I kept my education going to the point up until I couldn't anymore, which was I actually started getting jobs and I was starting to work a lot. And I went to college for a total of 7 years. Still don't have a degree, believe it or not. Although I mean, 7 years, I should be a doctor by now. But I kept my studies going for a long time, and but yeah, I ended up moving to California to pursue it, and it took a while, and even when I got in the door, it took a while to still climb up the ladder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, hard work and persistence, but I eventually got there.
And you talked about the graphic design study you did in the beginning. Have you ever done something with graphic design after all the years of education?
Yeah, I mean, Free Guy is a great example because there's all kinds of graphics that are in that I had to mock up an editorial with Sean. For example, when I think there's like a player banner that pops up over his head that he like waves away that shows his like status in the game. That's all graphic design. That whole movie is loaded with graphic design. Similarly, in Avatar, they have those sort of plexiglass panels that have like, they look like an iPad, but they're glass. Those have graphics on them. You have to mock those up. I've done several, movies or TV shows that had stuff like that. So yeah, my graphic design education is used every day, I would say, in this line of work.
Okay. Yeah.
And the thing about graphic design that it teaches you is good composition. Like there's elements of graphic design that will apply as a creative, whether you're doing graphic design or not.
So you can combine your graphic design education with your visual effects job nowadays.
Exactly.
Okay, so Brad, thank you for hopping on the podcast. I would love if everyone would check out the links in the description. Everything about YouTube and everything about Brad is in the description down below. So thank you for listening to the podcast, and hopefully I'll see you in the next episode.